everyone, and welcome to this Budget and Finance Committee for meeting of Monday, September 21st, 2015. I'm Paul Krikorian, Chair of the Committee, and I'm joined by Mr. Kretz and Mr. Blumenfield, and we have a quorum. We're ready to begin. Members, I would have proposed some consent candidates, but they all have cards, so we're going to defer those matters for the time being. Do we have counsel here on items 1 and 2? Do we? We're ready to go on items 1 and 2? City Attorney's Office? I'm sorry? Okay. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and take those items first, and we'll move into the back. But first, we have a card on item number 2, I believe. Mr. Spindler.
Number 2, it raises Anita Bush versus Pelicano. It's a case of harassment involving the Los Angeles Police Department in Los Angeles. So this poor woman is time to be paid, and these claims are very good because, as you see on item number 5, you probably spent $66 million settling all these lawsuits this year, and you have about $129,000 left for the fiscal year. So again, I congratulate all these plaintiffs for coming forward and proving that the LAPD is a quasi-terrorist organization. And this has gone too long. June 2nd, 2002, this happened. This poor person's been waiting now 13 years to get paid. You should pay this damage plus interest at 10% a year for the past 13 years, and good for her.
Okay, go ahead and stay there, Mr. Spindler, for item number 1, please.
Yes, item number 1, again, congratulations, another plaintiff coming forward, proving the abuse and the sedition of the City of Los Angeles against innocent people. Michael Bejarano versus City of Los Angeles. You may look at that in the Los Angeles Superior Court under BC 527273. The California Fair Employment and Housing Act was violated, and he was retaliated based on his race. And this happens a lot in Los Angeles involving housing issues where they just come in, throw people out because of their race. And we're not talking about white, we're talking about black, we're talking about brown. And this is a racist, segregated, apartheid city ran by a Los Angeles council and an LAPD that engages in criminal terrorism and stalking. So congratulations to Mr. Bejarano and his lawyer. It's an excellent claim.
Thank you. That closes public comment on items number 1 and number 2, and we are now going to go into closed session for consideration of those items. So you can stay here. We'll move to the back. All right, we're back in open session, and we're ready to proceed with item number 8.
Item number 8 is a motion, Martinez-Huizar-Krikorian, relative to discontinuing the issuance of business tax registration certificates to medical marijuana dispensaries that are not in compliance with Proposition D.
Thank you. And before we hear the report from Finance, we have a number of cards. So I'd like to start with Alexis Marin from the Office of Councilwoman Nury Martinez.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Alexis Marin. I am the Legislative Director for Councilwoman Nury Martinez, and I just wanted to read a letter from the Councilwoman. Dear Councilmember Krikorian and committee members, I want to express my thanks to you for scheduling Council File 14-0366-S2, requesting the immediate cease of issuing business tax registration certificates to non-Proposition D medical marijuana businesses. This has been an ongoing issue citywide since Prop D was passed. Local residents are forced to accept large concentrations of non-compliant medical marijuana dispensaries that often pop up overnight, and this is unacceptable. Children should not have to pass dispensary after dispensary as they walk home from school or shop with their parents. These dispensaries are a blight and a nuisance to our communities and in several instances have been the site of robberies and homicides. Prop D outlines specific requirements for compliant businesses, including distance between medical marijuana shops, their distance from schools, daycare centers, and parks. The public voted for access to medicine and not blight, but today that is not what our constituents see. Instead, they see empty marijuana containers left behind on their streets, loitering, crime, and dispensaries that often stay open past store hours. Many medical marijuana business operators have displayed BTRCs as a means to operate legally, confusing the public to believe that they are Prop D compliant. BTRCs should not only be given to businesses that are compliant with the city's ordinance that the voters approved. And this is why Councilmember Weezer and I, with the help of Councilmember Krikorian, introduced a motion that calls for the Office of Finance to immediately cease issuing new BTRCs to marijuana dispensaries. We cannot continue to send the wrong message about our stance on non-compliant dispensaries while residents pay the cost for this. Therefore, I ask that this committee amend the language and design of the medical marijuana business tax registration certificate to make more prominent that a BTRC is not a license to operate, nor is it evidence of compliance with Prop D. Furthermore, I ask that this committee direct the Office of Finance to discontinue the issuing of new medical marijuana BTRCs and limit renewals to medical marijuana businesses which attest to threshold Prop D criteria. Thank you for your consideration to this matter. Sincerely, Councilwoman Neri Martinez.
All right. Thank you very much. We have a few public speakers as well. If I can ask Matthew O'Malley first, followed by Ashley Hutchison. Mr. O'Malley, welcome.
Hi. Here. Esteemed council members, good afternoon. My name is Matthew O'Malley, and I'm appearing here on behalf of the United Food and Commercial Workers Union Local 770. As you may know, our union represents hundreds of union members who work in Los Angeles's medical cannabis industry, and we worked diligently throughout 2012 and 2013 to support and pass Proposition D. We find ourselves today in a situation where the job security of all of our members in this industry is threatened gravely by the unfettered proliferation of non-Prop D compliant dispensaries. And we are here to speak in support of this motion, the Martinez-Weezer Krikorian motion, to close this BTRC loophole. We feel like it's a very simple, straightforward thing that the council can do that will make it much harder for rogue dispensaries to operate in LA. Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Ashley Hutchison, followed by Wayne.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Ashley Hutcherson, and I'm a receptionist at Holistic Pain Relief, a Prop D compliant facility. I urge the committee to support the passage of item 8. While we know that important progress has been made, there's still a long way to go. This motion could play a vital role in reducing medical cannabis dispensaries in LA that are not eligible for limited immunity under Prop D. Enforcement against the banned dispensaries is paramount to create a level playing field for the small number of operators that may enjoy the limited immunity placed on the ballot by Los Angeles City Council in 2013 and overwhelmingly approved by Los Angeles voters. Thank you for your time, and please support item 8.
Thank you very much. Our final speaker on this matter is Wayne.
Yes, who is not Proposition D compliant really is a question of law. You should make a list of who these non-compliant people are, and you should make a list of them and make them available to us, the public, before you just cashew people's licenses to operate, because Sacramento is also dealing on another level, on a state level, to regulate these marijuana dispensaries, which everybody thought was such a good idea, but now they're having second thoughts, as the people from Nuri Martinez's office pointed out. Little kids are walking by all of these pot shops, and they're not in compliance with Prop D, but nobody really knows exactly what it means to be in compliance with Proposition D, a state law. So I would tread very carefully on this before you act.
Thank you. I'd like to invite the Office of Finance to come forward, please. Good afternoon. All right, so to set this matter up, I'd like you first to describe what a business tax registration certificate is, to whom it may be issued in this context, what, if anything, the Office of Finance does to determine business eligibility prior to issuing a BTRC. Start with some general background like that, if you could, about the purpose of the BTRC.
Sure. Ed Cabrera, Assistant Director, Office of Finance. The City of Los Angeles Office of Finance is the city's tax administrator. In that capacity, the Office of Finance issues a business tax registration certificate, which is issued to all businesses that conduct activity here within the City of Los Angeles. A BTRC is issued solely for tax compliance purposes. A BTRC is not and does not convey any type of regulatory or planning authority. It is not a license. It's solely a tax compliance certificate, which is issued so that an account can be set up for the taxpayer, and any taxes due from that particular taxpayer can be allocated to that particular account. The Office of Finance issues BTRCs in a number of methods, either through our public counters. Taxpayers can e-register as well, and taxpayers can also submit an application online or through the mail. When a business comes in to seek a BTRC, either the public counter staff or other staff who are reviewing the application will ask questions to try to determine their classification. But again, that's solely for tax compliance purposes. It's not, there are no types of regulatory authorities that are provided to the Office of Finance. So any type of questions, any type of activity that staff undergoes in terms of classifying a business, that's to determine what their business is for tax purposes. So that way the appropriate tax rate would be applicable for the business.
So does the Office of, with regard to any business, forget about medical marijuana dispensaries for the moment, any business at all that wants to open up shop in Los Angeles, what, if any, steps does the Office of Finance engage in to determine whether or not that business is legally operating with regard to any set of laws?
The Office of Finance has no authority to make any type of determination or finding or conduct any investigation with regards to a business's legal status. Our activity is solely centered on identifying their classification for tax purposes only, for tax reporting purposes only.
Okay. Now, with regard to medical marijuana dispensaries in particular, there's a separate tax category applicable to dispensaries. Is that right?
That is correct, sir.
And that's provided, that was provided by Measure M, which was approved by the voters.
That is correct. A separate tax classification similar to retail or wholesale was created for the medical marijuana dispensaries, and that is Section L050. So there is a specific tax classification. So if a medical marijuana business does come in and seek a BTRC, our staff will ask questions, same questions that they would ask of any business, in trying to ascertain exactly what that business does, whether they sell goods at retail, whether they're a professions and occupations business, or, for example, if it's a MMD, are they engaged in that? If they are engaged in that activity, then a BTRC is issued with the medical marijuana dispensary L050 classification.
And so if someone comes in into finance and says, I'm opening up a medical marijuana dispensary at such and such location, and in addition, in my front lobby, I'm going to sell T-shirts and, smoking accessories or other items like that, retail items. What does finance do in that circumstance as far as classification?
There's the potential, depending on the activities, the various types of activities that a business may engage in. We may issue both a retail certificate as well as the medical marijuana certificate. Again, some businesses, if they have separate discernible activities, they may be required to obtain multiple BTRC classifications.
Okay. Okay, members. Mr. Kretz.
So, taking this to the extreme, someone comes in and says, I'd like to open a counterfeiting operation. We're also going to engage in prostitution, and we're also going to have a meth lab on the side. Would you issue that?
The Office of Finance does not have any authority to deny any business a BTRC. Again, a BTRC is issued solely for tax compliance purposes.
So if they said, we do all these highly illegal things, will you give us a certificate, you would do that?
What we would do is we would consult with the city attorney's office to determine what is our authority to deny or whether we are required to grant a BTRC in that particular situation.
Are there any situations where you've denied in the past based on illegality?
No, we have not been provided with any type of legal authority that provides the Office of Finance to deny a BTRC to any business.
That seems like a rather frightening circumstance. So hopefully one which we'll find a way to address one way or another.
Well, let me just touch on that for a minute before I go to Mr. Blumenfield. Al Capone went to prison for tax evasion, not for murder.
That is correct.
He engaged in vast illegal activities, but he didn't pay his taxes, and that's why he went to Alcatraz. In this case, in the city, the BTRC is not a permission to do business. Apparently, people aren't realizing that, and that's going to go to my next set of questions after Mr. Blumenfield. And the BTRC is being improperly used by these businesses to indicate city approval. But the BTRC represent, whether it's MMD or any other business, am I correct that the BTRC does not grant permission to operate in the city of Los Angeles?
That's correct.
And it says so, does it not?
It does say so, correct, sir. And there is also language within the municipal code that the issuance of a BTRC does not grant authority for a legal business to engage in business illegally or for an illegal business to somehow obtain authority to operate.
Okay. Mr. Blumenfield.
Yeah. I mean, you're basically just setting up an account to pay taxes.
That is correct.
Which is the tricky part. But in setting that account up, how hard would it be? I mean, you have the list of pre-ICO dispensaries to compare and to know right away to be able to say, okay, we're giving you a license, but you're not on our list of pre-ICO dispensaries. Was that technically difficult?
No, assuming we had access to the list, which we don't.
How don't you have access to the list?
That list was not compiled by the Office of Finance, so the Office of Finance does not have access to that list.
Who has access to that list?
I would have to defer to the Office of the City Attorney.
Okay, well, I would imagine that is a publicly available list.
Well, I don't know that that's a safe assumption. I think that Proposition D provides certain criteria by which the city attorney has been instructed not to prosecute otherwise illegal businesses. But the city attorney's office has not sanctified those businesses as being legal. It's the other way around. Right. There's a Proposition D carve-out of an agreement not to prosecute if certain conditions are met. So it may very well be that there is no actual list. I'm sure that any of us who simply took the Proposition D list of requirements and drove around the city could fairly readily determine that that one is complies with the list and that one doesn't. But I don't know that it's even appropriate to ask the city attorney that question at this point, but it isn't a safe assumption that there should be such a list, because that's not what Proposition D requires.
Right, well, it doesn't, I mean, it doesn't create a sanctuary if you're on that list, but I don't think that you create that sanctuary by simply publishing a list, because pre-ICO means you were operating before a date certain, and that should be fairly well established. If you were operating before a date certain, there's a record of it. In fact, if you're coming in for a new permit, aren't you automatically not pre-ICO unless you can show that you were existing prior to the date that it was enacted?
Businesses often will come in because they've moved location. So some businesses will come in and seek a new BTRC simply for the fact that they've been in existence, let's say at 200 Broadway, and they've moved to a different location. So just because a business is coming in requesting a new BTRC doesn't necessarily mean that they have not been engaged in business in the city previously at a different location. There are a lot of nuances to requests for BTRCs that don't make it a simple black and white response in terms of whether someone's been engaged in business or not.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, you could make it an attestation and saying, were you a pre-ICO dispensary? We're only issuing licenses to pre-ICO dispensaries. Now, they could lie on that form, but at least then there's the onus is on them for lying on that form. Is that ever done, where you have an attestation like that?
No, not to that in terms of the classification or the type of business. Generally not, and not to deny a business a BTRC.
Because the other piece, they could register as a business, as a non-dispensary business. They would pay a lower tax rate.
That is correct.
So even if we deny them the dispensary one, they could still register as a business, and they could still use that license to claim inappropriately that they're a legal business. But the impact is that we wouldn't get it. We wouldn't get the additional revenue as a city.
That's correct. A business, again, when businesses are registering, our staff at that particular point in time, they're not validating either the activity or the manner in which the activity is conducted. They're simply taking the taxpayer and the business at face value in terms of what they're engaged in. So any business that we interact with, if they choose to not be truthful, then obviously we would register them what they're saying. But to answer your question, yes, MMD could come in and seek a retail certificate or a wholesale certificate or one of the other classifications.
This all goes back to our frustration why we can't shut all these folks down. It's not like you don't know where they are. You can go to weedmap.com and see where they all are, and you can compare them to the dates of it. It's not hard to figure. I can go on my iPhone and figure out who's legal and who's not legal. This is just another piece to it. But.
And that goes to the nub of the issue as far as I'm concerned, because this is not an Office of Finance issue. This is a city attorney prosecution issue. And what I would like to see happen, and I want to ask you straight out, is there any reason that you cannot provide the city attorney or the Los Angeles Police Department with a list of every BTRC applicant who seeks medical marijuana dispensary treatment?
No, as a matter of fact, we have done that in the past. We have provided a list of registered businesses in the medical marijuana classification to LAPD as well as city attorney in the past, and that's something that we can provide and make available.
Then isn't this really simply, members, I'm not going to ask for you to respond to this, but members, it seems to me this is if that can be done, and I'm pleased to hear that, because in previous discussions some months ago on related issues, it had been my understanding that finance was taking the position that these were confidential taxpayer submissions that would not be shared. But if that list is shared with the Los Angeles Police Department, it's really not any more complicated than taking a list, checking them against the Prop D standards, and enforcing. So rather than changing our business tax registration certificate process in a way that finance is frankly not at all prepared to do, either in terms of personnel or the skill sets or anything else, to have them then become an enforcement agency other than a tax enforcement agency, it seems to me that if we can share that information, we're 90% of the way there towards enforcing against these non-Prop D compliant places.
Just follow up, not only can it be shared with the police, but is that information made public?
Let me just clarify, council members, committee members, every taxpayer has information. Some of that information is considered non-confidential. Some of that information is considered confidential. Generally, the information that is confidential would relate more towards the financial aspect of their reporting, such as their reported tax measure, the amount of taxes. But non-confidential information would include the business name, the DBA, the location, and so forth. That information certainly is public, and we could provide that to any entity within or outside the city that requests that. We certainly could provide that to city attorney and to LAPD. As a matter of fact, that information is available on the city's open data website, and that website is searchable by different types of NAICS codes, by fund class, but the Office of Finance certainly could provide that list on a regular basis to whomever this body requests.
So right now, you can go to the open data site, Control Panel LA. You can click the MMD license and get a list of all of the business licenses that have been granted for medical marijuana dispensaries.
That is my understanding, yes.
Right. So you don't even have to give it to the city attorney. It's on our open data website.
Well, certainly to facilitate and to cooperate, this office can provide that list to any of the city family that needs it for regulatory enforcement.
Okay. Who do we have from the city attorney's office here on this? Is there a representative from the city attorney's office who can speak to prosecution of these cases? I'd like you to come on up and join the discussion if you could. And Mr. Kretz, did you have?
Yeah, I have questions.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So to make it even easier, could we have a process whereby every time we received an application from either a non-compliant medical marijuana establishment, if we were able to ask that question on these business licenses for medical marijuana establishments or any of them, and have a contact in the city attorney's office and a contact in LAPD, and whenever that is received, a copy just be sent by email so they immediately could prosecute them?
Conceivably, that's something that we could look at. I couldn't commit to a time frame only because of the number of businesses that our public counter staff encounters on a daily basis, and obviously we wouldn't want to impede customer service to the rest of the businesses. But certainly if we're looking at some type of reasonable type of reporting period, whether it's on a monthly basis where we update the list and provide it to, again, whatever agency or department needs it within the city, that's certainly something that we can work on.
And I'm not sure, though, that you've convinced me that at the end of processing that particular item, you couldn't just do a click and send it to receivers in both places and immediately allow them to take action.
Unfortunately, given the different avenues in which a BTRC can be applied for and secured, it's not as simple as simply clicking a button. But that's certainly something that we can look at and facilitate a process where we could provide that information on a timely basis where it is relevant. And I would also say that businesses that are registering for the business tax certificate, they technically can start business on, let's say, July 1st, and they don't necessarily have to come in, again, by ordinance and secure the BTRC until the end of their second month. So I would commit that we would have the ability to provide information on a timely basis to any of the departments, whether it's LAPD or city attorney, building safety, that would be enforcing property.
It could be even simpler than that, actually, because since it is available on the open data, you have a designated tax category that's only used by these businesses and no one else. So you don't even need to, there doesn't even need to be a human being sending an email. There should just be a periodic, automatic report. It could be weekly, it could be monthly, whatever, that lists, here's all of the businesses in the city that have registered for an MMD BTRC. Wouldn't that be a simple thing to set up?
Yes, we can certainly set that up within the Open Data website, and I would recommend that it be done on a monthly basis, just, again, because of staffing resources within our programming department, and also to ensure that we capture the activity that we've encountered during that monthly period. But that, yes, it can be as simple as that.
So if you got a report like that on a monthly basis that listed the applicants, would that facilitate your ability to compare that list with the Prop D compliance factors and create your own list of non-compliant applicants that could then be prosecuted?
Certainly. First of all, I'm Beverly Cook, Assistant City Attorney, and full disclosure, I'm on the civil side, and I rushed up here to answer your questions, but I can't necessarily answer the criminal questions. But I have participated because we represent Office of Finance and work very closely with them in terms of what information can be disclosed without violating a taxpayer's right to confidentiality, and we have provided those lists to our office for the criminal prosecution, to building and safety, to LAPD. I saw the list, and so I know they were out there, and they are being provided to those different groups for their various purposes.
Okay. So there's two issues as I see it here, members. One is this identification of using Office of Finance application information for prosecution of illegal businesses. It sounds to me like we're on the road to getting that done, which is, I think, a big step forward. And by the way, this will be applicable in other areas as well that we've touched upon in this committee with some of the short-term rental operations and other situations where there's a BTRC for a plainly illegal business. And once we have this established, we might be broadening it to other areas as well. But the second issue is the one that Ms. Martinez has highlighted, which is the inappropriate use of these certificates as some sort of city imprimatur of the business. And I think that needs to be changed separately, and I'm strongly supportive of the idea. I know it already contains that language, but for somebody who's not reading the fine print and they just see a certificate on the wall and it has, that calligraphy outline and a gold seal and stuff, it looks like this is a legit business when it's plainly illegal. I think we really have to fundamentally change the look of that. Maybe we should question whether a certificate per se is even necessary. Maybe a BTRC registration takes place, but there's no, trophy-like certificate that's provided at all. There's just something within Office of Finance that indicates this, this account's been set up, but why do they even need to show anything on their wall? At minimum, I would say that the form needs to be changed significantly so that it very prominently states there's no indication of compliance with Proposition D by issuance of this certificate, something along those lines, so that it's not used that way and it looks less like an official form of permission, because people do think that. I think people legitimately feel that way. They think that if they get that the city issued a certificate, this business must be okay. It's like the Better Business Bureau, seal of approval or something. And it should not be that. It is not that. It doesn't serve that function, but businesses are misleading the public with that. So I know I pressed you into duty, and I don't want to ask you, Beverly, about stuff that may be outside of your. But do you envision any problem with changing the format of this and prominently indicating a disclaimer on the, specifically with MMD? I mean,
Right.
maybe we should do it with everybody, but specific to MMD, because of the impact of Proposition D, maybe we need to have language that states very plainly in big block letters, City of Los Angeles has not determined that this business is compliant with Proposition D, something like that.
And Councilmember Kokorian, we have explored those options, changing the colors, changing the language on the face of the BTRC, and as long as we don't have to repeat every part of Measure D on it, we can come to some reasonable conclusions. And in fact, we did add some language about 2 years ago, and we look forward to working with staff or whomever to add additional language so that it's very clear that the issuance of the BTRC itself does not mean that you are compliant with Prop D. And we have looked at and explored some alternative language as well, and we are limited somewhat by the number of the space on the BTRC, but beyond that, I think we have some flexibility with what we can do. We've met with the systems people to see how much they actually can get into those spaces, into those fields, and we have some limitations with the description of the business itself. But on the face of the BTRC, we can add more language that's more definitive and clearer about exactly what it is that these folks actually have in hand.
And the Office of Finance is committed to working with this committee as well as with City Attorney to change either the face, the color, the language on the BTRC to effect the changes which this body requests.
Great. And to Mr. Blumenfield's point earlier, I don't see any reason that we couldn't, and maybe there is one, and I put it to you. Is there any reason that when an applicant for this particular tax category submits their request for a BTRC, that we could not mandate that they make a declaration under penalty of perjury that their business is compliant with the requirements of Proposition D?
I would defer to City Attorney on that.
I know, Councilmember Kokorian, we are looking at that in terms of the renewals for future purposes.
Yeah.
So we probably could take a look at something like that and impose it at the time that they actually apply. But we have looked at having an attachment, an affidavit of sorts that goes with the renewal itself. So we could probably do something along those lines with the application. I wouldn't want to commit to it today, but we have looked at it and explored it.
I think it would be a great way to go because you have another crime that's committed then. If not only are they operating illegally and selling marijuana, but they're committing either tax fraud if they don't get the MMD rate, if they go for a retail rate instead and they use that license, they're committing tax fraud. And if they are selling MMD, then but not compliant with Prop D, then that declaration would itself be another offense.
Right.
So it would give more tools to the city attorney, I think, to be able to go after the non-compliant bad actors.
And it may be a deterrent for some folks who, may not quite realize that they're in such a illegal, taking such illegal action if they actually have to sign something like that and perjure themselves on a document. That could be a deterrent as well. But additional question.
Yeah,
not
please,
so much about this.
please.
The relationship between these issues and some of the new state bills that are coming through. I know in SB 643, there's a provision about that in terms of state licensing, and specifically there's a prohibition about licensing to any entity that has not received and I believe it says permit, authorization, or license, and making sure that our permit doesn't get caught up in that state authorization, so that it's clear to whatever new state regulating authority that there's going to be that our issuance of a permit does not somehow trigger a state license?
Well, I'll defer to city attorney in terms of the legal interpretation of that legislation, but just for clarification purposes, the BTRC that we issue is not a permit, nor is it a license. Both of those connote regulation, and that is not what the Office of Finance has authority to do. So once again, the BTRC is issued solely for tax compliance purposes. It's neither a permit nor a license.
I know that's our intent, and then
No,
how it gets
exactly.
used or misused is the bigger question.
Correct.
And what I've read of the legislation, it appears that there is some exception for the city of Los Angeles. And one of the problems that we have is very often the state legislature confuses what our BTRC is and what a permit is. I know there's been other legislation where they've called our registration certificate a permit. We do not, as Ed said, we do not issue permits. So we have to make sure that the language is clear so that we don't get caught up in that. But I think there's a different procedure for the city of LA as well, or there was one being carved out.
And I mean, I haven't followed it closely, but has anybody been making sure that that's clear in these three bills that are on the governor's desk?
Right. I know we have looked at it peripherally, but the folks who advise our LAPD office have been following it more closely than we have from Office of Finance. But yes, there is someone in our office who has been following the legislation.
Okay. I mean, I would love to get a report back at some point about making sure that that's how the two pieces fit together to make sure that we don't. I'm glad that there's somebody who is following it. I do worry about it because the legislature does sometimes cast a pretty wide net or paint with a broad brush when it comes to these things. And just looking at the language that I saw in SB 643, it's pretty broad. It says
right.
Authorization, permit, license, or any other authorization kind of thing. So if it's not there, we need to make sure it gets there.
And Chair and committee members, if I may, just looking at the calendar, given that it's already the end of September, the business tax renewal season in terms of businesses filing for 2016 would commence on January 1st of 2016. We're already in the initial stages of reviewing our renewal packages, which need to go to the printer, I would say, by the second to third week of October. So I would just put it on the table that if there are changes that would need to be impacted in terms of the renewal process, there would be a deadline coming up for us to act. Certainly we would also potentially have to do some type of programming. If we're looking at solely the registration process, then we have more time and more flexibility. But again, both, whether it's altering our registration process, which occurs both manually and online, or our renewal process, businesses can come in and renew. They can renew via the mail, and they can also e-file. There would be some aspects of those changes that would necessitate programming. So that's also an issue that we would have to factor into any changes that would be upcoming.
Mr. Chair, given the tightness of that time schedule, is there any way we could ask for a draft of the changed BTRC for next budget committee year?
Well, we can, but it sounds to me like the certificate part of it is the part that could actually wait a bit, because the certificates won't be issued until after the January 1st process. But what you're sending out now are the forms for renewal to existing taxpayers.
Correct.
And if we're going to change process, if eligibility, if we're going to make a decision to discontinue issuing to medical marijuana dispensaries, if we're going to do those sorts of changes, those we need to do now before you do your mailing out to taxpayers.
For the renewal process. For example, if we're simply talking about the registration process where a business, as Councilmember Blumenfield suggested, would check off that they're compliant, the registration process is separate, so we don't have the same type of time constraints. If we're talking about checking off a box, for example, on a renewal form, then there is a time constraint there. that we would have to try to work around. But certainly, whatever direction that the committee is going in, we pledge to work with the committee as well as our city attorney liaisons to effect any change.
Something like doing an attestation is more than just the design of the certificate. That is the process. I mean,
If we're talking about at the registration,
that would need to be done right away.
if we're talking about at the registration stage, then that does not have any type of time constraint. We can work on that because we register businesses every day. What the time constraint that I'm referring to is the renewal process for businesses to report for the 2016 tax period. That commences January 1st, 2016. We mail out our renewal booklets in December, but of course they go to the printer several months before that. So if there's any type of change that impacts the renewal process, then we would need to make those changes so that we could get those changes and those new documents to the printer. Just one point of clarification. When a business does renew, essentially what we're talking about, they're reporting and paying for the current tax period, which would be 2016. At that point, we do not send out a new copy of a BTRC. Certainly, if this committee asks that we do change the face of the BTRC, the component, what I would envision is that we would send out new BTRCs to all registered and known MMDs. But again, there's not so much of a time constraint there. It has more to do with filing of their taxes, their business taxes, which commences on January 1st.
Mr. Kretz, anything further on this? Ms. Marion, could you come up again? We've thrown around quite a number of possibilities here, and I'd like to kind of try to wrap it up in a suggestion. So we're not meeting next week in this committee, right? So if we could have back in 2 weeks a recommendation from city attorney with regard to Mr. Blumenfield's suggestion of mandating that any existing renewal MMD or any new MMD provide a certification under penalty of perjury that they are compliant with the requirements of Proposition D. First of all, I'd like that to be considered by this committee in 2 weeks. I think the committee should also, I guess we can hold the entire motion for 2 weeks while that's coming back, unless there's some time sensitivity, and it sounds like 2 weeks would still be fine as far as your printing deadlines.
That's correct.
Okay. So I think at that time the recommendations would also include, unless I am misreading the sense of the committee, a recommendation that the form for the BTRC be significantly modified to make very clear that the issuance of the BTRC does not indicate Proposition D compliance, and it does not indicate permission by the city to operate the business.
Should we also notice a closed session for it in case we want to discuss legal elements of it at the same time?
We'll check with the city attorney whether the agenda could also provide an appropriate basis for a closed session because of the existing litigation that is involving medical marijuana. That's probably
not clear that it'll be necessary, but I think it would be a good.
Yeah, we'll check with the city attorney on whether that would be appropriate. It would be helpful, I think, to be able to discuss it in the context of existing litigation. And then the other recommendation, and it sounds like it's already at least beginning to be done, is a recommendation from finance for an automatic reporting process by which finance will provide the city attorney with a list of medical marijuana dispensaries that have applied for BTRCs on a periodic basis so that the city attorney can consider whether those applicants are Proposition D compliant and can proceed with prosecution against those that are not.
And
Yes.
that would go to the city attorney and LAPD? Or just the city attorney?
I mean, that's more prosecutorial issue, as long as it gets before the prosecutor. So, Mr. Edo, do you have a thought on that? We'll take it. Okay, then both the city attorney and LAPD. Why don't we just do it that way?
Chair, if I may?
Yes.
For clarification, would a report that is accessible on the city's open data website that's updated on a timely basis, would that be sufficient? Or would you be looking for something that is sent directly to city attorney and LAPD?
I want it to end up on their desk.
Sure.
And so however we do that, I want it to end up on their desk. And I don't want to just rely on them to periodically have the spare time to go and look at it. I think this needs to be a formalized process by which a report is issued, whether it's weekly or monthly, so that somebody at LAPD and somebody at the city attorney's office has it in front of them and knows that, you know, it's that time when I'm supposed to check this list against the Prop D requirements.
Understood.
I also think that, and maybe we'll have to do this by motion, but I think there should be an ordinance that makes it illegal to display an expired business tax registration certificate to members of the public. Because as we do this, I'm sure these same fraudsters who are operating illegally are going to pull out their old BTRCs and show those with the date concealed and defraud the public in that way too. So I think a separate ordinance barring the display of expired BTRCs to the public for the purpose of misleading the public would be in order. And I think if we can do it consistent with Proposition M, an ordinance banning an MMD from displaying a BTRC of a different category would probably be appropriate as well. So that if you are operating as a medical marijuana dispensary, you display your medical marijuana dispensary BTRC and nothing else. And so if we can get a report back from the city attorney and finance in 2 weeks on those proposals, I think that would allow us to move forward. Do I need to do a separate motion on those things? I think let's just contain all that in the report, and then we'll be ready to act in 2 weeks along those lines. Is that okay with Ms. Martinez's office?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. All right. Anything further, members? Okay. Then that will be the action of the committee. Thank you very much. Thank you for helping us reach a good solution, I think. All right. Thank you. That brings us to item number 9.
Item number 9 is the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment report relative to funding for a pilot online voting project for the 2016 Neighborhood Council elections. The Rules, Elections, and Intergovernmental Relations and Neighborhoods Committee waive consideration of this matter.
Okay, so Ms. Liu, yeah, if you could come on up, please. Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for your patience.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm joined here by our president of our Board of Neighborhood Commissioners, Leonard Schaefer. We are following up on a budget item that was approved in this current fiscal year budget. It's for $275,000 for online voting for neighborhood council elections in 2016. These funds were held in the unappropriated balance until we came back with some policy follow-up to the City Council, and it's particularly in regards to community interest stakeholder. And in our report, we do state that the Board of Neighborhood Commissioners has taken this task up, and they are requesting that City Council provide them the authority to make further clarification on substantial and ongoing in regards to the community interest stakeholder. This is one of the recommendations that's been set forward, and I can have President Schaefer speak on that if you would like. The other clarification that we wanted to provide was that the issue that we saw with online voting was not so much the community interest stakeholder situation, as we didn't have any of those challenges in 2014, because most of the neighborhood councils through the board structure changes have already limited community interest stakeholders to voting and running for one seat or one or two seats on their councils. What we saw in terms of the issues for online voting for neighborhood councils was more related to those neighborhood councils who use self-affirmation as a way to verify their voters, which basically on the day of the election is just the voter writing down their name, address, what kind of stakeholder they are, or what type of stakeholder they are, and without providing any further documentation, including a photo ID. This we thought that would be problematic for online voting. So our one change with online voting with those neighborhood councils that are using self-affirmation is to actually request that they upload a picture and along with a name, so that it wouldn't be just one person sitting there with a bunch of names, bunch of addresses, and trying to register multiple times to vote in a single neighborhood council. So we feel that these changes would assist us in making sure that the security of the system is adequate for the neighborhood council elections in 2016. And then any further clarification provided by the Board of Neighborhood Commissioners would be helpful, though not necessarily needed, because the substantial and ongoing definition clarification tends to be for perhaps 5% of the community interest stakeholders that we're looking at, because we already know from past practice that those who have children who attend a school in a location, or they go to church in a location, they board horses, those are our typical community interest stakeholders that are well known. It's usually the ones that are, like I go to a gym in one area and it has a location in another area, and I try to use that to vote. That's the clarification that I think would be helpful for the Board of Neighborhood Commissioners to provide if City Council so gives them the authority. I'm happy to answer any further questions regarding our report, and also to have President Schaefer provide any other updates if you would like.
Commissioner, anything else to add?
Only that we would appreciate the opportunity to look into this. I would recommend that the city attorney be asked to look at section 908 of the charter, which allows, I believe it's 908, which allows the city council to give neighborhood councils the ability to hold public hearings in support of legislation that may be passed, because this would have to be a legislative act, which I believe would allow the commission to hold public hearings with neighborhood councils to find out how they feel about many of these things.
Okay. Very good. Members? Mr. Blumenfield.
So how many neighborhood councils are going to be participating in the online voting?
So we do have an update. In the report, it says 34. However, we did have one neighborhood council where there was a misunderstanding in regards to the way they voted for online voting. So we'll be having 35 neighborhood councils that are participating in the pilot for online voting.
And do they decide for themselves to participate, or how were they chosen, and were they all chosen, or were some who wanted to not able to?
Sure. So initially, when the department, we sent out election stipulation worksheets for neighborhood councils, and we basically stated that there were defaults, that if you were self-affirmation neighborhood council and you didn't turn in the stipulation worksheet, that we would default you into online voting. However, upon further reflection, we decided that we would only take those neighborhood councils who selected to have online voting in their 2016 elections. And so all 35 of the neighborhood councils that are participating decided to select online voting. They selected online voting. They took board action. If we had done the default option, we would have added another 10 neighborhood councils to online voting. However, we decided that we really wanted to work with those neighborhood councils who had a game plan for online voting and really wanted to be in the pilot.
So so there's no neighborhood council that wanted to be part of it that's not part of it. If they took the action, they wanted to be part of it, and they are part of it.
That's correct.
So as a pilot, it's sort of all inclusive.
I'm sorry?
It's all inclusive of those folks.
That's correct.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The only concern I've heard from a few neighborhood council activists is concern about voter fraud. Is there reason to be concerned, and what steps would the department take to make sure this doesn't take place?
Sure. As I mentioned, we took the action for self-affirmation voters to, instead of just them checking a box saying, I affirm that I am who I am and that I'm this type of stakeholder, we are requiring a photo ID. And it's because we do know that stakeholders maybe don't necessarily have a driver's license. We are being inclusive in terms of taking a photo ID, as long as it has a name on it. So it could be a passport, it doesn't have to be a U.S. passport, it could be credit card with their photo on it. As long as we have a name in a photo, that's a way that we can limit the self-affirmation online voters. In terms of the documentation, neighborhood councils, they have to provide a photo ID as well as documentation as to what type of stakeholders they are. For instance, if they were a homeowner, they would actually have to provide us proof of that, be it a mortgage payment or a deed.
Now, all that would be true in person as well, right?
That's correct.
So no additional systems that we're talking about to reduce voter fraud purely based on the online nature of the voting? Just the change in the self-affirmation. Because in person voting for self-affirmation, they just fill out a form and say, they sign to that I am who I am, and that we don't ask them for any further identification. But that with online voting, we had to change that, because then that could allow somebody to vote online and then come in person and vote again. So we did have to make that one change. Very good.
The other concern about fraud would be potentially if somebody's voting for other people. Is there any sort of loop at the end where after it's done, the person is notified that they voted?
Yes, we are actually looking, just like when you have a ballot, when you vote, you have a ballot with a number on it that you can later on match to a ballot should there be any questions, that would be able, we would be providing that via email to the online voter. That's congratulations, you have voted, and here is a code that we can later on match the ballot.
And last thing, I assume we're going to get a report when it's all after the online voting takes place, and we'll be able to dissect it then and improve it and do all the good stuff.
Yes, definitely. We're very interested in obviously the success of the program, and to make sure that we really take a look at it to ensure that we are doing everything that we can to make it successful in the future as well. We actually are partnering with USC, and they are going to do a study on the online voting platform and give us that third-party point of view that I think is important as well.
So I've been strongly supportive of moving in this direction, and I'm pleased that we are. But I do have a lingering concern. Maybe it's a philosophical concern, and that is we have a digital divide in this city. We also have, in some respects, a neighborhood council divide in this city, because in many areas with socioeconomic advantages, the neighborhood councils flourish more than in some areas where people have less economic ability to spend the time to get involved in their neighborhoods. And so we've seen some places where neighborhood councils are not flourishing as well as in others. And I do have some equity concerns about moving the voting process online when there are still places in this city where we don't have as much access to technology as in others. So how will that be addressed? In what way will we ensure that everybody, whether they have a computer or not, whether they have Wi-Fi access or not, will still be able to fully engage in the neighborhood council electoral system?
Thank you, Council Member. That's a very important distinction to make. And I do want to note that online voting is in addition to the actual polling location. So our hope was to add multiple vehicles to vote as opposed to taking online voting and then eliminating one. So they will still have the opportunity to vote in person at a neighborhood council election, much as what you have seen in the past. And then other folks who may have the ability to vote online and maybe don't have that 4-hour period to go to the neighborhood council in person voting, they can do that. And then the other thing that's great about online voting is that it adds a telephone voting component. So even though some areas may not have the Wi-Fi access, they still have the ability to call in on a landline and actually vote via their dial tone. So it's actually offering two additional ways to vote in addition to the in-person voting.
Okay. All right. Very good. Anything further, members? We have a few cards on this matter. I'd like to ask first Glenn Bailey to come forward, followed by Wayne, followed by General Jeff. Mr. Bailey, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. It's only 1 minute, or do I get 2?
It's 1, sorry.
Okay, that's unfortunate. So Glenn Bailey, I wear a number of neighborhood council hats, but a few comments you need to please consider. Number 1, vote by mail used to be available. This will provide an option instead because it's no longer being offered. Also, this is the half of the money. It's $275,000 looking for next fiscal year. The self-affirmation and the photo is a good move in terms of the security improvement, but you should ask how many neighborhood councils and the percentage that were community interest, stakeholder, and self-affirmation, whether they're self-affirmation or not. Ask the percentage of voter percentage that were community interest, stakeholder voters. Also, the candidate filing starts mid-December, so the time frame should be moved up, in my opinion, to that beginning of December, and also it should be done in conjunction with our bylaw amendment window. So some neighborhood councils may want to make adjustments in their bylaws, and that window is once every July 1st.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Wayne, followed by General Jeff.
Yes, I think, what about all the languages? You have to, if you have telephone banks, aren't there like 64 languages you have to have it in? So I think multiple voting should be allowed. I think in these elections, I think you should be able to vote for your friends and your relatives. So if you have 6 people living in your house, I think one person should be allowed to be the delegate to cast the votes for the entire household. So if a household has 6, they delegate one person, and that one person votes 6 times. I think that's good. I also think, while we're at it, people in Cuba should be able to vote in all of our local elections. I think that's a good thing. We've opened relations with the Cubans. I think as a pilot program, just this one time around, all the citizens of Havana should be able to vote in these upcoming neighborhood council elections. So I think we should open this up to the whole world. It's a good idea.
General Jeff, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Commission. My name is General Jeff. I'm a proud Skidmore resident. I'm also a community activist there, and we're definitely in support of this motion is very important. That we definitely want to congratulate and also thank Dunn and General Manager Liu, as well as Bonk and President Schaefer for the self-affirmation process, being sensitive to our community, because an extensive process will be difficult for a lot of our people who are homeless and unable to provide multiple documents. There are people from our community that are homeless, disabled, they lack transportation to get to the polls, so online voting is actually a positive option for them. Like some of the SROs that have computers at their first floor hotels for all of the communities, and so it's a very positive aspect. And also the overall voting lines will be much shorter at the actual polls, so we're approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Also, there's more opportunities to increase overall voter participation across the city.
Definitely. Thank you very much. All right, members, anything further on this? I would just like to make one suggestion on the delegation to Bonk, which I am delighted to recommend, and I'm delighted that you're willing to take on that very gargantuan, difficult task, because it's something we've grappled with for as long as I've been on the council, and when I was ENN chair, and Godspeed to you is what I would say. I would just add, okay, my one recommendation would be that upon delegating that authority under recommendation number 2, that the results of that be subject to the concurrence of the council and the mayor to ensure that your work product does come back to the council at some point, so that we would have the opportunity to weigh in on it. Mr. Kretz.
Yeah, I'm just wondering whether any thought was given to the fact that you wind up with a completely different demographic voting if you have in-person voting or vote by mail or online, that you probably change the results of the election.
So, our thought about this was it could potentially change the results of the election by increasing the number of people voting. I think, in the past when we looked at trying to find a feasible way to increase voter participation in neighborhood council elections, that it's very difficult because neighborhood council elections are limited to that typically 4-hour period on one day. And with very few neighborhood councils using vote by mail, and those that do use vote by mail not having as much success with people actually returning ballots if they ask for it. So we do anticipate more voter turnout because of the online voting aspect, including some candidates who weren't able to actually come to the location to vote for themselves. I know that happened in multiple neighborhood councils. So yes, there will be a change, but we think it's a positive change. And again, because we're still offering that polling location ability to vote at that point, that it will just be in addition, that now we'll be able to include more people who weren't able to attend that 4-hour window.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have any strong opinion of whether one demographic is better than another, but needless to say, online voters will skew younger and more computer conversant, and non-online voters will be less so. So I don't know whether you'll have more voters than you would have if you did vote by mail and in person, or just in person, but you'll definitely have a different group of voters.
And I think that's the intent, because what we do see with neighborhood councils is that they tend to skew older, retired, and it's not that saying it's a bad thing. However, we're looking at the sustainability of the neighborhood council system and being inclusive to all the various populations in the city. And I think that the more abilities that we can, the more options that we can offer to different demographics and different ages, I think that's better.
Any neighborhood councils that have asked for vote by mail and not online?
Yes, there is one neighborhood council, Westwood Neighborhood Council, who's asked for a vote by mail. We did follow up with city attorney, and we will be able to provide them that option. However, because right now they're the only neighborhood council that's asking for it, the cost will be somewhat high. However, if they're willing to pay for it, then they will have that option.
Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Just going to add one thing. If I didn't say it before, I'm excited about the whole online voting. I think it's great. And I think this time next year, you're going to have an app that's going to make it easy for anyone to vote off their cell phone. We're going to look back at this time and think, how could we not have had online voting? It's going to be hard to imagine. People are going to be describing, they remember when we didn't have it for neighborhood councils.
That's right.
So it's wonderful. I see the evolution of it with easy app. Everybody has a smartphone these days. I think it's democratizing. It's going to be good for all demographics across the board. So I'm just put it out there. I'm excited about it. So
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember.
President Schaefer, let me engage you on this a little bit, because recommendation 2 does provide this delegation. Has to be by ordinance, apparently, to delegate that authority. But the ordinance language of substantial and ongoing would not be modified. It would be the responsibility of Bonk to sort of create a list of the kinds of things that would comply with that ordinance language. Right? Is that the...
That's my understanding in my conversation with the city attorney. It would be expanding upon the terms of substantial and ongoing, not by way of synonyms, because we can come up with dozens of those still, right, but as guidelines for the department and the city clerk when they're formulating the election procedures. That's basically what it would be doing.
So the reason I had made the suggestion that those recommendations be subject to the concurrence of the council and the mayor is I can envision that you'll have challenges, and somebody will say, well, no, I'm a community interest stakeholder, and Bonk just didn't include my justification in their list. What would that person then do? What would be their recourse? What sort of appeal would they have? Would they appeal to Bonk for reconsideration of their circumstance? I mean,
There is an election challenge process in which that they could bring. We would allow them to vote provisionally. We don't ever turn anybody away. And then we would have to resolve the matter at the challenge level, which are going to go to the grievance panels that were recently created. Mm-hmm. And they will be resolving that matter in consultation with City Attorney's Office and looking at any of the commission recommendations.
Okay. It seems to me that the potential for grievances might be alleviated somewhat if council concurs in Bonk's judgment. It becomes sort of the process of the city then that this is how we're going to proceed, unless the commission has concern about proceeding that way. Maybe that would be the best way, because it strengthens Bonk's findings on this, I guess, if we concur in it when that's completed.
If I may.
Yes, please.
I fully agree, and I'll talk to the city attorney. I'll talk to Deputy City Attorney Darren Martinez, who supervises the unit that oversees neighborhood councils. I would envision something like when we did the NCRC, the Neighborhood Council Review Commission, and we made recommendations that the city council was able to weigh in on and adopt, some of which became part of the ordinance and some which then became policy. I think that would be a very wise idea.
Okay, great. Then just if we can add, I would submit as an amendment then to recommendation number 2. At the conclusion of recommendation number 2, we add subject to the concurrence of the city council and the mayor. And then if there's no objection, members, as amended, we can advance those recommendations to council. And then if the city attorney does have any issues, we can take that up at the time of council, but I think it's probably a better way to go. All right, any other concerns or questions about that, members? All right, then it will be the action of the committee to approve the recommendations of the department as amended and to advance those to council.
Thank you
very much.
members.
Thank you for your good work on this.
And Mr. Chair, for the record, this item is scheduled for council tomorrow, Tuesday, September 22nd.
Very good. Thank you. All right, then members, that brings us next to the items that I would have called as consent items. So we can go through those. Items numbers 3, 4, 5. Well, let's just take them in order. Item number 3, Mr. Spindler.
Again, very good job by Macias, Ginny, and O'Connell LLP, who's known inside City Hall as MGO. And everybody had a chance to read the Article 13B appropriation limit calculation. And there's been a lot of discussion about this Article 13B appropriation limit calculation of the agreed upon procedures application report. And it's been something that people all over the city have been talking about. I mean, just the other day in the Home Depot, somebody came up to me and said, oh, Monday they're going to be talking about the Article 13B appropriation limit calculation. So everybody should go online and read the accounting firm Macias, Ginny, and O'Connell's recent report, especially how much money we're paying this outside accounting firm to do all this lovely work.
Mr. Spindler, you can just stay on and speak to item number 4, please, as well, if you would.
Yes, another huge debate around the city is the cost allocation plan cap 36 for fiscal year 2013-2014. This is where HUD, in conjunction with the Health and Human Services Department, calculates the ratio for the plan allocation for the city's negotiated control fiscal impact statement dating 1986 to the present. And it only took an additional year to go back to the 2013-2014 fiscal year that now Controller Ron Galperin is addressing this. But it seems Controller Galperin now has got what we all call City Hall-itis. And he's getting a little sloppy now and a little lazy and tired. But, you know, you have to expect that when you work here. This is what happens when people work here. They come in aggressive and then they get run down and rolled over and tired. So hopefully he'll get to the 2014-2015 report very soon.
Members, any questions on item number 4? Seeing none, it will be the action of the committee without objection to note and file that item. Mr. Kretz, you had a question on item number 3.
Yes, and I don't know if there's anyone here to address it. My question is...
Controller's office? Here? Okay. Yes, good. Mr.
So I just wanted to know where we are on the GAN limit, how close we are to hitting it, and maybe a brief summary of how it works in the LA budget context.
According to the latest adopted budget for 2016, the amount appropriations are under limit is $787.7 million. The closest we ever came to the limit, according to this schedule, appears was back in about 90-91 when we were at $10.8 million under the limit, but since then we've been in the range of $1 billion under the limit.
So it's because of the city's financial difficulties, we actually haven't been in danger of hitting it. What would our action be if we actually reached that point?
It's my understanding, essentially what would happen is the city would have to return the amounts over the limit back to the taxpayers.
So we couldn't keep it in reserve or anything like that, we'd have to return the money?
Within about a 2-year period. I think there's some exceptions to that if there was a fiscal emergency or something of that nature. But essentially it would be due back to the citizens.
No danger of coming close to that anytime in the near future, it doesn't sound like.
Does not appear so.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. If there's no other questions, without objection, we will note and file the report on item number 3. Thank you very much. That brings us to item number 5. Eric Previn, please. Followed by Mr. Spindler. Mr. Previn, welcome.
Yes, thank you. Is this one working? Would you allow me to speak on 5 and 6 together for the 2-minute block? And for the record, sir, I think 1 minute in committee is a strong cup of coffee because obviously we have this ongoing crisis with public comment in the city hall meetings and here, and so that is upsetting. But I'll take my lump. Item number 5, sir, is the report by the city attorney relative to the status of the general fund liability claim accounts as of June 2015. It's sort of the end of the fiscal year. So it's interesting. In the end of 2014, we had $53 million available, and we had only spent $33 million. Fast forwarding to now, which is looking at the end of the fiscal year in June, $66 million available, and we spent $65 million. So effectively, we started out with a $50 million horizon, and we've increased it to a $65 million. So that's a 25% increase. If you want to know where that money came from, there were a bunch of cases that added up to about $12.5 million, ranging from your 400,000 trip and fall to your 1.75 million excessive force, just a bunch of them that added up to 12.5. So you got a big job on your hands, and I understand that. There are some things that you might do that would be helpful in not having repeat issues, which include something called a corrective action plan. I'm not sure if you do those here, but we haven't seen them, and they would be published if you're doing them, and that lets the other city employees who are in that department know why we're not going to have this problem again. It's a great area. Another thing that you might do to avoid getting hosed by all these firms that you're in business with regularly who charge $3.95 an hour like Meyer Nave and so on and so forth is you might set a contract panel rate like they do over at the county as well. This is a municipal rate that they can do business with the city, but they have to work at that rate. And I must tell you, the outside counsel versus in-house approach needs to be fully teased out. When do we decide to use an outside firm versus when do we use in-house? And if the in-house firm is an option, in-house attorneys is an option, we have to keep track of their hours. I've been on this with Mr. Dundas, who's a city attorney who works in the public record division. We must keep track. For example, in the Carol Sobel case, which was $1.1 million out the door to an attorney for that horrible case, how much time and effort of our city attorneys was deployed there? Because that would tell us the full scope of that picture. And the only way we can make intelligent decisions about whether or not we want to keep using Meyer Nave, who earned $16 million over the last period of time. I'm sorry?
Yeah, your time has expired. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, thank you very much, though. That brings us to Mr. Spindler.
Yes. Reading the report, a big shout out, congratulations to the city for paying out $66 million in judgments to all these wonderful, lucky people. Really, good job, Mike Fuhrer. Yes. If you would have elected Carmen Trutanich, it'd be half of that right now, but that's okay. Looking at the honor roll, we have Obie Anthony, wrongful incarceration after the murder convictions were overturned, $8.3 million. How do you give back a man's life? Well, I guess his life was worth $8.3 million. Then you have the concerned citizens of South Central Los Angeles, $4.8 million. The plaintiffs allege that the city breached the contract to allow plaintiff to build a recreational complex. Yes, that's a death-defying case, isn't it? $4.8 million. So again, congratulations to all of these lottery winners.
Actually, Mr. Spindler, can you speak to item number 6 too, please?
Item number 6 wraps its little head around item 5. I've been trying to read the report, but the gentleman will not put out the report. How much money did we spend on all these wonderful outside city attorneys to defend the city against these poor people here we go. Okay, so I just got handed to me. It looks like about $24 million that we've been spending on all these wonderful attorneys to defend the city. And the problem is that the city will not admit liability. When it's liable, 90% of the time you could admit liability and try the case on damages. And you could go to mediation on these cases. But because you have all these campaign donors and friends and relatives and lovers and criminals and blackmailers, you have to go to all of these law firms and pay them $300, $400, $500, $600 an hour. So the real winners are the lawyers, and everybody else, well, they lose.
Thank you, Mr. Spindler. Item number 7, please.
Again, now this is a big congratulations. $6.1 billion of city money, and how much did we make on it? We lost money. Negative 0.12%. Yay! We lost money when you could go down on Havenhurst and Ventura Boulevard and earn 1% on your fucking CDs. But we're losing a tenth of a percent on our money when we have $6.1 billion to invest. When property is up 17% in the last 2 fiscal years, we're putting it in all of this bullshit and losing a tenth of a percent. On $6.1 billion of investable funds, amazing. But again, the Office of Finance was here telling you when Mr. Correct said, would you license a drug clinic? Yes. Again, a big congratulations to the city for losing 0.1% on $6 billion of money. Yay!
All right, members, any questions on the remaining items 5, 6, and 7? All right, seeing none, it will be the action of the committee to note and file those reports, items 5, 6, and 7. That concludes our agenda items and brings us to general public comment. Our first speaker will be Mr. Eric Previn, followed by Glenn Bailey, followed by Wayne. Mr. Previn, welcome.
Yes, it's Eric Previn, a resident from CD2. And embedded in those legal reports was also the CEQA panel that I came unglued about when I first arrived here at City Hall, which is this panel you put together of firms like Meyer Nave, Burke Williams, Sorensen, Sohagi Group, and a couple of others, to help with land use battles. And the idea is that the contractor can drip the money in, city doesn't have to pay, and they'll fight the battle for the city. It's a disaster, obviously. And it's only a teeny bit of money that's been used so far, $68,000 so far. It's page 3 of the report. But what's confusing is, for example, they signed a contract for $40,000, Meyer Nave, for the Beechwood Canyon matter. It's got a different name. It's called MLK Marlton LLC. But I found it through the case number, but they've only spent $14,000 so far. So where do we get a sense of the overall sums? This is just kind of like an incomplete report. And my note on these reports, though they're like a lot of information, they need to be kind of married so you have a feeling for what's happening. Because if someone said, how much did the city spend in litigation this year, it might be hard to answer even for anyone on the committee. And so if we can provide those kinds of standard forms and then share them on a regular basis and inform the public about what is happening with the cases, I think we might be able to clean up some of these legal messes that we have, sir. So that's my comment. And
thank you very much, sir. Our next speaker is Glenn Bailey, followed by Wayne Spindler.
Glenn Bailey, I am one of the Neighbor Council budget advocates this year, and I just want to make sure that you all have a heads up that our regional budget day is coming up on Saturday, October 17th. It will be held at multiple locations throughout the city. I think there's 6 of them, including the Valley at the Browdy Center, 9 a.m. to 12 noon, and certainly members of the committee or any council members would be welcome to go to the one closest to them and to be introduced. And the purpose of it is the work of the budget advocates, meeting currently with the city departments, getting an earlier start this year, and also to take those comments received from the various departments, as well as a budget survey that will be launched probably at this weekend's Congress of Neighborhoods, and will continue through the regional budget day to present those findings or input for the regional budget day, and then get further input as we give recommendations to the mayor and council and on the process before the departments submit their requests in November. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bailey.
Yes, they have I don't see my claim on the list here. Spindler versus Department of Water and Power. I filed it a year ago, and your lovely city attorney in the DWP has not answered for that wonderful fire you started up in the mountains and burnt 33,500 acres in Lake Hughes and Lake Elizabeth. So again, this is what happens. The DWP authorized outside counsel in closed session to represent themselves with two major law firms, millions of dollars. So once again, they're taking a hard line. We know the pole fell down. We know it was 90 years old. You're liable as hell. The only issue is damages. They will not talk to us. So they're going to force lawsuits. Again, everybody loses. The law firms on your list win because they're going to get all this money to represent, and in the end, it's just going to cost 30-40% more than simply settling these claims.
All right. Is there any other item of business before the committee?
No, sir, that clears the desk.
Very good. Seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you.